Muy buenos días a todos. Mi nombre es Miguel Peñate y les doy la bienvenida a una nueva edición del Gaming Growth Academy. Hoy, 16 de marzo, tenemos el lujo de contar con una sesión dedicada al User Experience, siempre para la vertical de gaming. Y como saben, esta es la octava edición de nuestro programa de Gaming Startup School. Han habido 7 otros programas en donde hemos hablado de múltiples otras categorías, formas que tienen de mejorar vuestros juegos y les animo a visitarlos en el portal de Google for Startups de YouTube. Hoy contaremos con una invitada especial que presentaremos a continuación. Simplemente les quiero recordar que dentro de la página de Google for Startups se pueden suscribir a las siguientes sesiones, en donde iremos viendo un contenido súper interesante de la vertical de gaming durante todo este año. Hoy comentaremos nuevamente la sesión de User Experience, User Interface, y por qué es importante esta sesión, ¿no? Nosotros con los clientes solemos trabajar mucho en mejorar todas esas ventanas dentro del juego, todas esas transiciones, botones, colores, cualquier aspecto puede verse modificado y ayudar al ratio de conversión, ayudar a que los usuarios moneticen. Pero, por ejemplo, hay una media que es que del 3 al 6% de los usuarios que tienen descargado un juego acaban haciendo una in-app purchase. Eso, evidentemente, es un ratio de conversión bastante bajo que con alguna modificación se puede mejorar de cara a que la monetización del juego sea muy diferente, mucho mejor y que les ayude a potenciar vuestros negocios dentro del mundo gaming. La sesión de hoy será en inglés. Nuestro invitado es Fatih, es consultor de UX dentro del equipo de monetization de AdMob. Y a continuación le doy paso en inglés y toda la sesión será en inglés. Les animo nuevamente, como siempre hacemos, a hacer preguntas dentro del chat de YouTube. Yo creo que en este caso, como muchos otros anteriores, tenemos el privilegio de tener una persona que trabaja con los grandes estudios a nivel Europa y que tiene todo ese expertise que nosotros podemos aplicar en nuestros negocios. Por lo tanto, pasamos al inglés y nuevamente nos vemos en próximas sesiones y disfrutar esta. Fatih, thank you so much for being here today. I'll let you to introduce yourself and to tell us why UX is important and the content.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Miguel. Thanks for inviting me. And hi, everyone. Very good to be here. My name is Fatih. I'm working as a UX consultant as part of the other apps and gaming team within Google. Very quickly, I pretty much work with all different like apps and gaming publishers, and I try to help them to improve their user experience when it comes to user onboarding, engagement, retention, and monetization related challenges, right? And I'm part of the other AdMob team, so I pretty much work with those publishers to improve their ad monetization as well, right? So today's presentation is going to be all about the data-driven UX framework that we use internally while we are working with our partners. So we just wanted to share with you that approach, and also we're going to share with you like a couple of tips and tricks on how you can actually do these analysis on your side so that you improve your user experience to achieve your business goals, right? So let me quickly move there. So let's start with a quick introduction, right? As I said, today's presentation is going to be about a data-driven approach for mobile ad monetization, right? And we're going to look at it from like multiple different angles. But before going into those details, I just want to ask you like a couple of questions. The first one is, I want to know which top line metrics do you check every day, every week, on a regular basis in order to see your app's health, right? Just write them in the comment. I know that there's a bit of like delay in the live stream, so I'm just going to wait to hear your answers. I'd love to hear what are the things that you guys keep an eye on a regular basis. Think about all these like different metrics when it comes to like monetization and usage. Because this question is really important because this is like one big part of what we're going to present you today. And my aim is that like I'm gonna share with you like a couple of ideas on a high level, so that you're actually staying on top of your key performance metrics, right? So while you guys are writing, let me give you like a little bit like idea in terms of like what are those possible metrics. And I'm starting receiving the answers from the chat. Some folks says day one retention. I'm also seeing like conversion to purchase event. Yes, these are good, really good comments. Jama says hola, hola. Yeah, these are really good. So here, think about metrics like retention, app stickiness, engagement-related metrics, right? So if you have in-app purchases or subscriptions, think about your conversions. Think about your conversions from free trials to subscribers, right? If you have ad monetization, check your ad performance from like a multiple different angles, right? These are all really good answers. My second question will be around, yes, we know these metrics and we track them on a regular basis, right? But the question becomes, how do you make sure that these metrics are actually good and you're staying ahead of your competition, right? For example, if you're looking at, for example, the ratio of your monthly active users to your weekly active users, how do you know that this is a good number? If you're checking your day one retention, how do you make sure that your day one retention during soft launch is actually like a good number, right? Again, write them in the comment. How do you benchmark these numbers? How do you compare yourself? This is basically the second promise of my presentation today. I'm not only going to share with you certain metrics, but I'm also trying to give you a couple of like ways and techniques so that you can actually know that these metrics are good and you're staying ahead of the other competition. Right, so this is pretty much the other promise of today's presentation. And while I was trying to answer those questions for you, I'm going to rely on this 5-pillar approach, right? So when we talk about user experience, because it's a very broad topic, right? So the definition of UX can mean multiple things for multiple different people. For us, it has 5 components. It all starts with the analytical, right? So analytical related things are kind of the foundation of this overall 5-pillar framework, right? So once we look at the analytical foundation, then we move to the user journey related metrics. And when it comes to user journey, we specifically talk about user onboarding, which is the first time user experience with your app or game, right? And then the second part is related with the engagement related discussions. And then finally, we look at your long-term retention mechanics, right? And the final part is the monetization layer. We intentionally reserve monetization as the final layer, because a successful monetization strategy is only possible if you have a strong analytical foundation with really strong user journey metrics, right? So this is going to be the flow of my today's presentation, and I'm going to go into the details of each of these pillars one by one. And just keep that in mind. While I'm sharing you the details of these each pillars, we are going to basically benefit from 2 tools, right? The first one is what we call peer benchmarking, which is basically a way for you to compare your app's performance with a close set of peers, right? And those peers are most of the time are direct competitors of yours. And sometimes when you're entering a new market, this could be even the biggest players in this specific niche, right? And there are a couple of best practices that I can share with you in terms of structuring your peer group. So here, what I would suggest is don't include very few apps. Also, don't include too many apps as well, right? Try to maintain a variety, but keep the number minimum. What I would recommend and what we do internally is we use minimum 5 apps and maximum around 10, 12 apps within the other peer group. And we try to be very careful about what goes into those peer groups. And if you're talking about a game, we try to select those competitors from the games that share similar core game mechanics or that are attracting similar audiences, right? So try to choose your niche, but do it very carefully so that it becomes representative. This way, you're going to compare your vital metrics with the average of those competitors, right? And the second one is obviously what we call A/B testing, right? Because within that framework, we're going to help you to extract a couple of like UX-related opportunities. But the only way for us to know if those recommendations are actually working or not is through A/B testing, right? Because without A/B testing, any UX recommendations that you get is just an idea. And I would probably don't recommend you to trust anybody's ideas, including yourself, and always go with like an A/B test just to make sure that they're actually contributing to your top line metrics, right? So this is going to be the other two main tools that we're going to benefit from this presentation. So let's start with the first pillar. As I said, the first pillar is going to be the analytical foundation, right? Because a data-driven approach is only possible if we have the fundamentals right. But what do I mean by the analytical capabilities? Let's go one by one. So the first thing is the examples that I'm going to share with you in the next couple of slides are going to be from our own Firebase tool, right? Firebase is a really rich platform for apps and game developers where you can do various interesting things, like you can set up your backend, you can store your data in the cloud. It has various like machine learning capabilities. You can use its analytical components and things like that, right? So, but you don't have to use Firebase. So you can pretty much use any analytical tools, right? So the things that I'm going to tell you today are independent from the platform. I highly recommend you to discover Firebase if you haven't done already so, because Firebase complements really well with the other different Google monetization products like AdMob and Google Ads, right? So if you have ad monetization or if you have paid user acquisition, I think Firebase connect the dots really well. But again, it is not mandatory. It's just the example that I'm going to use today. So yeah, as I said, the definition of analytical foundation is very generic. But if we go into if we zoom into this opportunity, the molecular components of data analytics is all about tracking the right events, right? This is basically the minimum ingredients that you have within your analytical foundation, and it's all about making sure that the critical user events are properly being tracked, right? Because everything else we're going to generate from now on, they're going to be relying on those user event metrics that are being tracked, right? And those metrics can be related with ad monetization, right? So you can do things like you can measure your ad clicks, ad impressions, reward completions. And on the other hand, let's say you have a level-based game, right? So those events can be level successfully completed, level completion score, level failed, and things like that, right? So these are all the individual items that you need to track. So when we're working with our partners, this is the first thing that we do. We identify all these critical user events and we make sure that they are properly being tracked. And just keep that in mind. By default, Firebase tracks a lot of like critical events, including ad monetization related events. But for each game, there are obviously a lot of like custom events that we need to create. So it's pretty much like up to the game designer, game developer to decide what are the right events in their specific use case, right? So once we do this, next step becomes all about like visualizing all these individual data points, right? And this is basically done in the form of like identifying critical user journeys or funnels, right? So let's take a couple of examples. Again, if you take the level-based game, level progression is like a really good example for identifying a funnel. So what is the win-loss ratio for each levels within your game, right? How many times your players are trying that level before they successfully pass that level, right? On the other hand, if you have a game economy like soft currencies, hard currencies, how do you monitor the in-game economy inflation, right? How do you track the usage of these individual game economy items? If you have a tutorial, what is the tutorial completion ratio? So I think this gives you a bit of like really a good idea about like what are those funnels that we're talking about, right? They are again very different for different apps, but it's all about like making sure that we know the critical funnels within our user journey, and we visualize them in a nice way using our analytical solution. So that's the second part. And once we have the critical funnels visualized, the next thing becomes, so this is very related to the first question that I asked you at the beginning of the presentation. What are the top line metrics you guys are checking every day or every week, right? So here is like a good example. So I pretty much call this, I find it very similar to like a cockpit in a plane, right? When you're flying your plane, what are the critical things that you keep an eye on? Here, I'm not talking about every detailed metrics, right? I'm only talking about the high level metrics that you need to monitor and visualize on a regular basis, right? So this could be around like conversion events. You can check your engagement. You definitely need to look at your retention numbers per different cohorts. You need to keep an eye on your revenue metrics, your daily active users, and things like that, right? So these are the high level metrics and that you need to visualize in like a nice way, so that you have a top line view of all the things going on within your game, right? The other critical part of analytical foundation is what we call segmentation capabilities, right? And segmentation is a very trivial concept. It's basically it's all about like slicing and dicing your user base in meaningful quantities, right? So it could be certain user demographics. It could be the users that are coming from certain geographies. It could be that users that you have acquired through like a certain user acquisition campaigns, right? Those type of segmentations are really trivial and not that complicated. Here, what I mostly want to focus on is what we call advanced smart segmentation capabilities, right? Because in the last couple of years, thanks to the other advancements in the other machine learning capabilities, right now we can create more advanced user groups. I'll just give you a couple of examples. So right now, for example, if you use Firebase predictions, based on your users' behaviors within your app, you can predict whether this specific user is going to become a purchaser or not, right? So this is something that we do thanks to like a machine learning algorithm. So once you identify a player's likelihood to become a purchasers, then you can do all sorts of interesting stuff with them, right? You can differentiate your monetization strategy accordingly. You can create custom offers to those like predicted purchasers, and you can, for example, for those predicted non-purchasers, you can create additional ad monetization options and things like that, right? Also in Firebase, you can do segmentation as per the likelihood of your users to churn in the near future, right? So if you know that a specific user is going to churn in the next couple of days, then again you have the capability to do a bunch of like different stuff. You can send them like a custom offer. You can try to re-engage with them through push notifications. You can basically adjust your game level difficulty and things like that, right? So I just want you to make you aware that these advanced segmentation capabilities are kind of becoming like really popular among gaming developers, and Firebase supplements them really well. And also different Google products has these features embedded. For example, if you're using AdMob for ad monetization, AdMob by default provides you like a feature called Smart Segmentation, again, where you can very easily show ads for the predicted non-purchasers, right? So these are all great segmentation capabilities that can drive usage and improve your monetization metrics. So I encourage you to discover them and try to see what type of use cases you have within your own game. So that's pretty much what we mean by analytical capabilities, right? So the next pillar is is basically our first step to the other user journey, and the first thing we look at here is what we call user onboarding, right? As I said, user onboarding is pretty much encapsulates everything related with the other first-time user experience with your game. right? So here, I just want to put it into like a conceptual spectrum. So on the left-hand side, you're seeing a simple pick up and play type of game. So this is Flappy Bird. That says when it comes to casual gaming, even like hyper casual gaming, this is one of the notable names, right? The good thing about this game is that there's pretty much no onboarding necessary. You just pick up the game, and you automatically understand how you should play the game, right? You basically tap on the screen, and just by the feedback you get from the bird, you pretty much learn how to play this game in maybe like 5 seconds. There's pretty much no onboarding necessary, right? But on the other hand, I put Clash Royale as a like a good example. So this is more kind of like a core game, where the game mechanics are more complex. You have like a very complex core game that is surrounded by a bunch of different meta loop elements as well, right? So learning the details of Clash Royale takes a bit of time, and it takes a bit of like progress as well, right? So that's why Clash Royale is benefiting like a more advanced onboarding technique in the form of like a contextual help. And those type of onboarding experience can last like maybe up to like 10-20 minutes within your first session. Even sometimes they continue for like several days, several weeks, depending on your progression within the game, right? So I just wanted to show you this as an example in order to highlight the two different spectrums of this onboarding needs, right? Probably your game falls somewhere within the spectrum, right? So I encourage you to think what type of onboarding is necessary for your game. And sometimes just keep that in mind. Onboarding is maybe not a way to go, right? Maybe you just blend it in your natural gameplay and make it like a part of your part of the other game experience. So this is the two extremes of the other onboarding needs. And again, we said we have a data-driven approach, right? How are you going to measure that your first-time user experience is actually performing on par with the competition? So let's look at that metric. So the top-line metric that we use for onboarding success is what is called a day one retention, right? So very simply, day one retention is so if you take like out of the other total users who open your app for the first time today, what percentage of those users are coming back the following day and opening your app again, right? So this is the definition of this ratio. And the reason why we choose this metric has basically two main components. The first one is that day one retention is kind of like a general purpose metric that you can pretty much generate for all the apps on the App Store, right? So I'll give you like a couple of options on how you can check retention numbers for different apps. So you pretty much can look at third-party data providers. So I'm just going to name you like a couple of like well-known names in the space. You can look at like App Annie, Apptopia, Sensor Tower, and tools like that, right? So, just keep that in mind. By no means Google is affiliated with them, but I just want you to know that these are a couple of like prominent names in the industry that you can benefit, so that like you look at the other retention numbers of your competitors, right? So this is one way of looking at that opportunity. The second opportunity, if you have an Android app, Android Developer Studio can help you to generate like various data benchmarks on your site. So you can create your peer group and you can benchmark your retention numbers, App Store conversion numbers. You can even benchmark your crash rates. We call them like Android vitals, right? Obviously, this is for Android, but this can give you like a very nice representative idea about like how your competitors are doing, how your peers are performing, right? So these are just your options. So here I wanted to share with you like a couple of numbers. So here, when we look at the gaming vertical overall, we realize that the average day one retention for the 50th percentile is around like 38%. And when we look at the most successful games in this space within the top 10 percentile, they are achieving day one retention numbers around 52%. Right? So this is kind of the other spectrum that you can keep an eye on. But also don't forget, there's a lot of variation between different gaming verticals, right? So this is just a general benchmark. I recommend you to refer to the other numbers that are specific to your genre. So yeah, this is the other top line metric. But like, how do we visualize this, right? How do we look at the other opportunity in within the context of our competitors? So here I'm just going to show you like a day one retention benchmark that we create internally. So this is a sample data, but basically we try to see how the game that we are evaluating is performing compared to the other peer group average, and also we try to see what is the individual distribution of those day one retention numbers, so that we see the average as well as the highest and lowest numbers among those peers, right? I recommend you to set up a similar benchmarks for the games in your own portfolio. So here I'm just going to share with you like a couple of tips when it comes to user onboarding, but just keep that in mind. User onboarding is a very detailed subject. We can talk about user onboarding specifically for multiple hours, and it is not very realistic to cover all user onboarding tips in couple of slides, right? But regardless, I just want to share with you the high level tips and tricks here, and I leave it for you to discover the other details later on. Maybe we can do like another session specifically for that one going forward. So yeah, some tips. The first one is basically your tutorials, especially for games, shouldn't be something standalone. It needs to be carefully blended within your game's experience as well, right? So basically, you need to enable your players to discover and learn your game as they play. So we call this like contextual onboarding most of the time. And in order to do that, a lot of games pretty much benefit from their in-game characters in the form of a conversation with the players, or sometimes they use like hand gestures to point the important call to actions within the game, right? So this is kind of the ideal scenario for gaming apps. If you want to have a tutorial, it shouldn't be something standalone. It needs to be seamlessly blended into your game experience. The next one is basically don't share all the things all at once with your players, right? There needs to be a progressivity into your onboarding as well. So here we took like an example from like a battle game. Basically what they do initially is they teach you to learn how to defend your base, right? They create like a dummy scenario where you get attacked by like a enemy, and you learn the basic fundamentals of the defending your base. And here the aim is not to have like a realistic defending experience. Here the aim is to teach the player the basics, right? So just keep that in mind. Your players shouldn't be defeated in those type of experiences. Our point is to teach them the fundamentals. So once we do that in this example, then the next experience becomes like learn how to attack. Basically, we work on like a simple scenario to attack the enemy, and then we move to the advanced defending and attacking techniques with different weapons and soldiers and things like that, right? So this progressivity is really critical, and that helps you to teach your it helps your players to learn those things as they go within your gameplay. And the next one is related with the messaging that you use while you're communicating with your players. So here we have Homescapes as an example, right? So they have like a main character within their game, and the way they interact with the player is in the form of like a speech bubble, right? The character is basically engages with the other player. Sometimes these are instructional, educational conversations, but sometimes they're just fun, just to keep the other engagement levels high. But the good thing is that these are all optional, right? Player has the right to dismiss those messages anytime. They can simply ignore them and continue with the other core gameplay, right? Whatever messaging that you are using, it needs to be unobstructed with the other overall game experience, and it just needs to complement the other game experience overall. So yeah, moving on, we have one last thing for the user onboarding. So this is related with the permissions that you ask from the other player. So whenever you're asking something from the player, just keep that in mind. It needs to be very clear why you are asking that specific permission, right? So here, if you take the social logins with Facebook, for example, we need to make it very clear that like what are the other individual things that that will be improved out of this connection, right? Just focus on the benefits. You can say you're going to save your game progression, you will have the option to play with your friends, and then maybe try to encourage that behavior, right? Hey, we're going to award you like 100 coins if you connect your account with our game, right? And this is also true for push permissions as well. If you're asking for like a push permission from a player, just make sure that they know the context. What is the reason? What is the benefit, right? You can say, hey, here is your daily reward. Welcome to our game. Would you like to get notified when the next reward becomes available, right? So just keep that conversation and context always available for the player. This is true for storage access. This is true for location access as well. So that was the brief tips and tricks for the other user onboarding success. So now I want to move to the other engagement. So yes, we acquired our first-time users and we managed them to bring to day one, right? But what is going to happen afterwards? How are we going to engage with those first-time users, right? So this is the part that we cover under the other engagement umbrella. But again, let's put it into like a spectrum as well. So here I'm going to take an example from the other non-gaming vertical. So here, on one hand, we have one airline example. So just look at your own experience. Probably most people have some sort of like an airline app on their phone, right? So if we take, for example, Turkish Airlines, I personally have that app on my phone for the last couple of years, but I opened that app very rarely, right? Especially during the COVID pandemic. Probably we're not traveling that much, but time to time we open the app, we check the prices. But the major use case for us, we open those apps when we embark for like a journey, right? Even though we don't uninstall them, the level we engage with those apps are very low. On the other extreme of the spectrum, we have, I put Spotify as an example, right? Think of any music player you have. Think of any radio apps you have, right? Think of the other messaging apps, social media apps you have on your phone. You pretty much like open those apps almost every day, if not multiple times within the same day, right? So your level of engagement is significantly different. So I'm not saying that one approach is better or worse than the other, but my aim is just to highlight that different apps, different games, they have different levels of engagement, right? And again, your game probably falls somewhere within that spectrum. So it is good to be aware of those realities within your own niche, right? So this is just like a good way of representing the other different engagement levels. And again, let's look at how we can measure this as a kind of like a general comparison purposes. So here, the top line metric we look at is what we call app stickiness. So within the other comment section, I think like a couple of folks highlighted that they look at like MAUs, weekly active users, monthly active users, right? This is spot on. So app stickiness is a great way for you to measure your engagement success. So here, the definition we use is basically the ratio of your daily active users to monthly active users, right? And again, let's take a hypothetical scenario. Let's say your app stickiness is 100%, right? This means that all of your monthly active users are opening your app every day, right? So that's a very engaged user behavior. When you look at the gaming vertical in general, again, the average is around 22%, and the most successful games in the top 10 percentile, they achieve more than 33% app stickiness. So just keep that in mind. 33% means that those players are opening those games once in every 3 days, right, on average. So I think this will give you like an idea about the general engagement trends within the games. And obviously, certain genres have a very different app stickiness numbers, but this is just the general gaming average. So again, similar to the other day one retention benchmark, this is how you can visualize your stickiness numbers. Again, you can rely on the other third-party data providers as well as like Android Developer Studio to create those type of benchmarks. But just look at how your app stickiness numbers are performing against the other peer group averages, as well as try to look at the other individual spectrum, right? So segmentation is really key when it comes to engagement. So I just want to touch on that a little bit as well. So you can segment your users in based on like various different like angles. You can look at the player's activity, right? So number of like unique days plays out of the total days since install, number of sessions per day, average session lengths, and things like that, right? You can also look at the player's competence, like win-loss ratio, experience points, and tasks completed per session. By the way, I'm seeing that there are a couple of questions coming in the chat. I'm going to cover all those questions right at the end of my presentation. Please keep them coming. And also, you can look at the viral behavior of your of your users. So viral and social features are really critical to critical in spreading the word. It drives organic downloads, right? But those features are not for everybody, but for the ones who enjoy them, they're really powerful, right? So that you can actually differentiate your users who are actually benefiting from viral social features, and you can provide like a more rich experience for them. And you can take a look at like number of invites sent per day, number of friends, and things like that. And again, monetization is critical part of segmentation. So if you have like certain game rewards, you can pretty much look at like what is the other amount spent out of the other total amount rewarded. You can pretty much see how much of the other possible rewards are claimed by the other players. And if you have a game economy, you can pretty much measure how many times your game economy or game economy metrics hit zero balance, right? So that you can have an idea about like what is the engagement with your players with your game economy items. Do you have an inflation? Do you need to generate more coins and things like that? So this is really critical for driving engagement. As I said, app stickiness is the other top line metric for comparison comparison purposes. But if you want to measure the other engagement specifically for your game in more detail, these are the metrics that you need to take a look. But these are obviously not possible to compare with your competitors. So there's a balance here. So again, let's touch on like some tips. Again, it is not possible to cover all engagement tips and tricks here. I'm just going to share with you like a couple of high-level ideas. So again, if you have a level-based game, adapting the other difficulty dynamically based on the other player's competence is really recommended, right? So that like you basically stretch your competent players as well as provide room for growth for your beginner and novice players, right? So you can do this dynamically based on your in-game events, and Firebase has really great tools to achieve that, right? You can pretty much optimize your level difficulty dynamically for your players' different needs. On the other hand, it is really critical to track the other improvements of your players, right? So just make sure that your players are engaged, they progress within your game, and those progression mechanics are visual for them, right? Sometimes they build an avatar, they acquire like additional weapons and things like that. Sometimes even like if you take like a simple card game, progression and improvement and the learnings are really critical. You can basically share some stats, leaderboards, some badges and recognition mechanics so that your players know that they are actually progressing within your game and they have a path ahead so that they can continue playing your game, right? So these are a couple of like tips and tricks that you can pay attention when it comes to engagement. So the last pillar for the user journey is retention. So here pretty much we look at what happens after like a couple of weeks after the first app opened, right? So here long-term retention when it comes to gaming is usually around we look at it on like a day 7 and day 30 basis. So here the top line metric that I can recommend for you to look at is day 30 retention. So this is kind of like a industry-wide benchmark that is commonly used by a lot of like publishers and game developers. So this time, as I said, we are looking at the other long-term retention opportunity. And when it comes to the other general gaming benchmarks, the average day 30 retention is around like 9% for the other 50th percentile of the other games. But again, just keep that in mind. The most successful top 10 percentile games, they can actually achieve more than 15% day 30 retention. As a general rule of thumb, I just want you to keep that in mind. Most successful games start with day 1 retention, which is around 50%. And after day 7, they see the first halving period, right? Most successful games, day 7 retention is usually around 25-24%. The second halving period occurs when it comes to day 30. And again, those games, they tend to achieve like 12, 13, 14% day 30 retention this time. So just visualize that curve in your mind, right? Day 1, day 7, day 30, 50, 25, 12% retention curve, right? Again, just keep that in mind. There is a lot of variation as per different gaming verticals, but this is just kind of like a very easy, very quick way where, in terms of like how you can memorize those best-in-class numbers for the other gaming averages. So let's go into the tips and tricks again. Oh yeah, one last thing. So we also use the same methodology to visualize your day 30 benchmark numbers, so that you see the comparison as per the peer group average, as well as the individual distributions within the peer group. Nothing different here. It's just that this time we're using day 30. So let's look at the quick tips and tricks here, right? So when it comes to retention, it is all about providing the right reason for your players to come back, right? And the most critical aspect of this is basically through the push notifications, right? This is an inseparable part of your re-engagement and long-term retention strategy. And at the end of the day, it all trickles down to 2 psychological triggers, right? In order for you to bring your players back to your app, you either provide positive psychological triggers or negative psychological triggers. Let me explain what do I mean by that. So positive triggers are usually the most common ways of re-engaging with those users. So daily rewards are like a good example for that, right? It's basically you're creating a positive incentive for your players to come back. You're awarding something for them. You're giving a daily reward. You're if you're talking about idle games, while you're away from the game, your game generates some offline earnings for you, right? Or I don't know, like if you're talking about like a e-commerce app, they send you like a discount code or something like that. These are all good examples for positive triggers, and they need to be benefited significantly so that they contribute to your long-term retention numbers, right? But on the other hand, we can also benefit from negative psychological triggers. And the good example for that, if you look at like battle games, they time to time they send you push notifications saying that, hey, your base is being attacked by the enemy. If you don't come back, you're gonna lose a building. You're gonna lose like, I don't know, like 1,000 coins, something like that, right? So this way you're kind of like creating a negative psychological trigger, so that player knows that if they don't come back to the other game, they know that they're gonna lose something, right? But the most important part is that you need to keep a healthy balance here. Our aim is not to punish the players. It's just that we want to create a bit of like healthy anxiety for the player, so that they care enough to come back to the other app, right? And again, don't punish your users. Just create them a bit of like a negative psychological trigger, and be forgiving as well, right? Provide some options for them to recover from that damage, right? So it could be, again, it is very common in farming simulator games as well. They say, hey, you have a dairy farm, for example, and if you don't come back to your apps, your game, the milks in your dairy is going to expire, right? Something like that. So this is like a really important part of the negative triggers within the other game vertical. So try to use them both, like a really nice healthy combination, and don't be kind of like penalizing for your users. Just try to be forgiving for them. The idea is to bring them back to your game, right? So this is pretty much the final pillar of the user journey. So I just want to touch on the monetization pillar very quick. So as I said, I'm part of the AdMob organization. So for me, I'm heavily biased for ad monetization when it comes to game monetization. But I work with like various different games. So they are most of the time utilizing like hybrid monetization mechanics. They have in-app purchases, they have subscriptions, as well as ads, right? So I'm just going to share with to like a couple of ideas on how you can focus on monetization performance. But unfortunately, when it comes to ad monetization, there is no one single top line metric that you can look at, right? Obviously, you can look at the dollars you earn, but it doesn't tell you much about your performance, right? So that's the reason why we go a little bit like more detailed with the ad monetization performance, and we look at it from like multiple different perspectives. The first one is what we call ad load for the other players, right? So it's all about like how many impressions you're generating per DAU, how many impressions you are generating within like a set amount of time. It could be minutes, it could be 10 minutes, depending on the other session length. And what is the other ad tolerance of your users, right? How are you measuring your retention curve based on different ad load experiments, right? How is your revenue split? What is the percentage of ads coming from different ad formats? What is the ARPDAU by different ad formats, right? How do you check the other performance? What is the other eCPM rates coming from different formats? Is there a country variation? What is the other conversion rates, right? And the final pillar is specifically reserved for rewarded ads, because rewarded ads are, again, very critical part of gaming apps, and these are tightly connected to your overall user experience. And there we basically look at like what is the other rewarded user percentage, right? Meaning that out of your total daily active users, what percentage of them are at least like receiving one reward through rewarded ads? We look at rewarded impressions for those rewarded users, and we try to see the other reward completion rates. As you can see, there are various different ways of approaching that opportunity, and I highly recommend you to visualize those metrics and try to see how you are performing within those critical angles. And again, so the partners that we work with, we try to help them to create those benchmarks as well. So here, for example, a benchmark that we created, one of our gaming partners, so that we show them like what are the most common ad formats that are used within your peer group, fit within their peer group, and as well as like what are their revenue contributions, right? So in order to get those numbers for your app as well, just like approach to your AdMob point of contact within Google, and we will be happy to assist you for those type of like benchmarks, right? And for those rewarded users, again, we try to look at the other reward penetration, meaning that what percentage of the users are receiving at least one reward, and for them we basically check the other reward frequency. So these are a couple of ways showing like how you can visualize your ad monetization performance. So that's pretty much what I have today for you, right? Let's quickly recap all the things we have discussed. So we basically divided the user experience for games to 5 pillars. We started with the analytical capabilities, and we highlighted like what are the fundamentals that you need to track, like tracking the right user events, creating the right user funnels, using advanced segmentation capabilities with machine learning and things like that, right? And then we move to the user journey, and we started by looking at the user onboarding experience with day one retention, and then we moved to the engagement experience with app stickiness metric, and finally we look at long-term retention by measuring day 30 retention numbers, right? And then the final pillar, we looked at the monetization, because we know that monetization is only viable if it relies on strong user analytical metrics as well as strong user journey metrics, right? So there basically we try to share with you like a couple of ideas on how you can look at your ad monetization performance. So I hope this was useful for you, everyone. Feel free to share any questions you have within the chat, within the comment section, and I'm going to address them one by one. So we already have some questions, so I'm going to quickly look at them. Gemma was asking like, shall we define Firebase events regarding our game mechanics in terms of retention, correct? So correct, but let me explain what do I mean by that, right? So retention is by default is already measured, I think pretty much like with every analytical solution on the market, including Firebase, because retention is basically measured through app open events, right? So if you take like a user, when they download your game and open it for the first time, the first app open event is being triggered, right? And if they open the other game the one day after, there's another app open event triggered, and the retention is simply calculated just by looking at those app open events, right? So pretty much you don't need to do anything specific to measure your retention properly. But if you want to measure your retention for specific user cohorts, let's say you want to measure the retention of your users who specifically reach level 10 and beyond, right? Then you need to create those custom events so that you can combine your app open events with a couple of like custom events that you created, right? So I think I hope that answers your question. So the default retention is very straightforward, and it is embedded in various analytical solutions. But if you want to go advanced, yes, you can actually need to create those events based on your game's reality. We have another question from Alejandro. Which permissions are we obliged to ask for? In the beginning of my games, I'm asking about showing ads and connecting them to Google Play Games. Am I obliged to do it? So I think so there are a couple of things for that. So the first part is related with the legal permissions and disclaimers, right? So and for that, obviously, I'm not like a legal expert, and each game is operating within different jurisdictions. Some are operating in Europe, some are operating in US, China, and some of them are operating globally. So I recommend you to look at those legal minimum requirements for those regions that you're operating. But if this is a legal requirement, yes, you need to cover this as one of the other first things within your game before your players reach your game, right? And try to do this in, again, a user-friendly way. Don't use like very lengthy text. Don't use like super detailed legal jargon, right? Try to keep it simple and try to compile with the required laws per se, right? This is true for ad personalization and things like that. But on the other hand, you have other type of permissions which you require technically, right? And I think a push notification permission is a good example for that. If you want to send push notifications on iOS devices, you technically need to get a permission, right? Because otherwise it's not possible for you to send a push notification because system simply doesn't allow you to send any notifications, right? And for that, what I recommend is that, first of all, question whether you really need that permission, right? It could be push notification, it could be location access, it could be local storage access. Just question the other need. If you think that this is really needed and it is beneficial for the user, try to wait for the right timing, right? Because I'm seeing a lot of games asking for push permission as the first thing when you open those games during the first open. You download the app from the App Store, and the first thing you see is like a push permission notification, right? But like, I haven't played your game yet. I don't know whether I'm going to like it or not. And you're not explaining me why do you need this specifically and what is the benefit for me, right? So don't fall within this trap. Wait for the right timing. It could be that you can ask for the permission right after your users finish your onboarding. It could be like maybe you're giving a daily reward and use this as a proxy to prime for push notifications, right? And give them a bit of context. Explain why you need this, and then ask for the permission. It goes same for the location access as well. So this is probably a way of like differentiating different permissions. I'm just checking whether we have any other questions. Yeah, I think we have a Slack channel for this community. And again, if you have any more questions, feel free to join there and share your experience and share questions in more detail. But that's pretty much what I see in the comment section. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot, for joining in today's sessions. Miguel, can we close the session, or do you have anything else to share here?
Just for the tips and what's in. I will be very happy to comment about Jane
I think Miguel's internet connection is a little bit slow. I was hearing his voice in slow motion. But basically, he was saying that like if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop us an email. You can reach us from the Slack channel, or simply keep adding your questions to the other comment sections of this video. We will be happy to come back to you. But again, thanks a lot for your time. I hope this was useful for you. Thank you.